This is part 3 in a series of videos about my project to upgrade this 220 to an 8-foot long 300-gallon tank from Custom Aquariums. In part 1, I introduced the project and talked about some of the reasons for it. And in part 2, I toured the headquarters of Custom Aquariums, so if you missed either of those videos, I'll link them below. The tank is currently in transit, so I've been using this time to do some prep work to make sure that everything is ready to go when it arrives. There are some things about the way my existing tank is set up that I plan to carry forward to the new tank, though I do plan to make some improvements. And there are some other things that will completely change. One of the big things that will change is the filtration. This tank is filtered by 3 canisters, but the new tank will be filtered by a sump. But in order to minimize the noise, the sump won't be in the stand. It's going to be down in the crawl space that's directly below the tank. This crawl space might look familiar to those of you who've been watching me for a long time. I used to have a big aquaponics system down here, though it was on the other side of the house. It's not a super fun space to work in because it's only like 5 feet tall, but having the sump down here is going to give me a bunch of extra room for plumbing. I'll get into the details of all that later, but for now, I needed to build a stand for this thing. No one will really see this, except of course for all of you, so looks don't really matter. I decided to just build a very basic stand from 2x4s and plywood. So I went out and grabbed the 2x4s, and I already had some plywood on hand to reuse that was already painted with a couple of coats of Kills. The first step was to cut the 2x4s to length. Once that was done, I started to assemble it. Then I did the same exact process again. I did the rest of the assembly down in the crawl space because it would have been a pain to move the stand around once it was finished. The last step was to add the plywood top. Now I've got a nice space for the sump once it arrives. I may add some more plywood to the bottom later to create a shelf for storage, but for now it's good to go. Another thing I needed to work on was the fill system. When I say there are things I plan to carry over from the old tank to the new one, a big part of that is the way I do water changes. And it's a little bit complicated, but worth going over. It's really 2 different systems that serve similar purposes. One system does automated overnight water changes, and the other allows me to do big manual water changes without carrying buckets or hoses. The overnight water changes are run by the system I originally built to run my basement fish room. I did a very detailed video on it back then, which I'll link below, but the short version is that the water goes through a temperature valve and then into these water filters to remove the chlorine. Then the sprinkler timer is set to send water directly upstairs to the tank in the middle of the night. I used to have 4 zones on this, but when I tore down my fish room, I removed all but 1. I used this same system to refill the tank on my big water changes as well. When I removed the other 3 zones, I just teed this off and it runs across the ceiling and up to the tank via this tubing. But it's pretty slow. I don't really need this water to be filtered since I can just add some dechlorinator, so I decided to add another tee before it hits the filters that runs up to the same tubing. And the flow rate is nearly double the flow rate that I was getting through the filters. So this system now gives me the ability to do automated overnight fills and big fills whenever I want using either filtered or regular water. So that's another big change I made in preparation for the new tank, because my water changes will be even larger and I wanted them to be as fast as possible. Now if you're wondering where all of this water goes, that's another thing that will be changing. Right now I have 2 ways to get water out of the tank. One is this DIY tube that's basically the same as a canister filter input, but instead of going to a filter, it goes to this pump and then down through the wall to the basement to a floor drain. It's nice because it allows me to drain the tank very quickly with no manual labor. This same concept will be in place on the new tank, but instead of this overflow, the tank will just be drilled. I had them drill an extra hole for me down in the bottom corner, so that will connect to the pump instead. The second way that water leaves the tank is this overflow box, and that's how the water from the overnight fills is displaced. And it works pretty well. It also runs down through the wall to the drain. Same concept. But it takes up a bunch of room in the tank, and while I've never had a problem with it, there's a possibility that it could stop working. This function will be moving from the tank to the sump, but I'll be adding some more automation to it. That's not really something I can work on right now, but I'll be sure to explain it in detail later. Another thing I had to plan for was what to do with my fish while these tanks are moving around. Most fish you can just throw in a bucket or multiple buckets, but this guy is huge, and I want to stress him out as little as possible. So I went to Tractor Supply and bought this 100-gallon Rubbermaid stock tank. The dumb part is that I had one of these a couple years ago and sold it. But they're only like $70, and worst case I can just sell this one after I'm done with it. But my current plan is to put a couple of the canisters from the tank on this stock tank while he's in it just to keep him happy and keep the biomedia active. I need to figure out a lid because I can't just leave it open like this. He'll definitely try to jump. And the last thing I've been doing is buying plumbing supplies. In case you hadn't picked up on it yet, I'm going to have a lot of plumbing work to do to make all this work. The pump for the sump has to run up through the wall to the tank and then to a manifold that will connect to the 4 returns they've drilled in the tank. And the overflows will need to run back down, and then all the other stuff that I've mentioned. So it's been a lot of planning and trips to the hardware store. In my next video, I'll show the tank arriving, hopefully in one piece, and then after that we'll work on some plumbing. Thanks everyone for watching, and until next time, have a good one.